All right, thank you so much. Thank you for participating in the poll. And hello, we're so happy you're joining us for today's roundtable, Trailblazing, the Virtual Transformation of Learning. I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll really quick. And then we'll get started here. All righty. So every generation has a different challenge. COVID is most certainly ours. We will grow and learn, but in what unique ways? And what did this pandemic modify our practices? And how did this pandemic modify our practices? What did we learn about ourselves? What did we learn about our healthcare system, our institution, our leadership, and our peers? We will learn to have critical thinking. This quote, these questions are so relevant to what we're all doing today and to this roundtable, which is so much about resiliency and facilitating change within your organizations. I'm Jennifer Shukla with Training Orchestra. With many currently in the process of transforming their learning programs by increasing virtual delivery of training and creating more of a blended learning approach, we're very excited to bring together 4 L&D leaders who are trailblazers in the virtual transformation to talk about the tactics they've employed to achieve outstanding results within their organizations. We hope this session will provide you with ideas and inspiration you can use in your own organization and your own learning programs. Before we begin, let's go ahead and learn a little bit more about our audience and take a quick look at the results of the poll questions you answered as you joined today. So what concerns are most pressing in the near future? I'm sure this has probably changed a bit from what we were all saying pre-pandemic, but you can see that keeping employees engaged is definitely high on the priority list for sure. And what metrics are you using to measure the effectiveness of your virtual training? Again, training completions, I'm sure, I knew that was going to be an important subject for many of you. And as well, it looks like it's pretty spread out evenly. Improvement in employee job performance, increased learner engagement, improved client feedback, all important things for sure. So which of these best describes your audience? Who is your training audience? Well, we have a lot of people here who are training doing internal employee training. We have some who are training their external audiences, partners, clients, and distributors, and internal and external. That's great. And how are you managing your VILT and ILT training operations today? I see a lot of you are using spreadsheets and shared calendars. We also have some that are using a training management system, outsourced managed learning services, and a homegrown bespoke system as well. That's great. It's always interesting to know more about our audience. Thank you so much for participating. And by the way, I'd love to share a little bit more about our audience today. We do have a global audience from learning organizations representing over 35 countries, so welcome. We also have an audience members from over 25 different industries here today, and leading the way is education, consulting, banking and financial, manufacturing, medical pharma, and many more as you can see. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. We are recording this roundtable and we'll email you the replay within the next day or 2. And finally, we encourage you to ask questions throughout the sessions via the Q&A function in your control panel. Our panelists will be answering those questions during the second half of the presentation, so we'd love to hear from you. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to our moderator for today's roundtable, Nancy McMonigal with Bluewater Learning. Nancy?
Thanks, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. I'm Nancy McMonigal with Bluewater, and I'm honored to be here to facilitate this esteemed panel discussion. So Bluewater and Training Orchestra have been hearing a lot of great stories over the last couple of months throughout this pandemic. And so we really wanted to share some of those transformation stories today. So let's start with our introductions. So Mark, let's start with you. And please tell us who you are, of course, and where you work, where you're located, and then tell us about the one resource that you felt was indispensable that really helped you understand how to relate to your learners.
Sure. Thank you, Nancy. And hello, everyone. I guess good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, since we have folks from around the world, so that's very exciting. My name is Mark Coppola. I'm the Director of Organization and Professional Development at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So I'm located in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, which is near the city of Raleigh, for those of you that are familiar with North Carolina. If you're not familiar with UNC Chapel Hill, we're a large public university with approximately 30,000 undergraduate and graduate students. We have 74 bachelor's programs, 104 master's degree programs, and 65 doctoral degree programs. So we are the only public university in the US to award degrees in the 18th century. So we've been around a while. I have not been with the university that long. My team is responsible for new employee orientation, professional development, and skill building training. So we do all sorts of organizational development interventions. We do executive coaching, leadership development for supervisor, manager, and senior leader populations. And then the audiences for our programs are all staff and faculty. So to answer the question about most important, I know this is going to sound a little cheesy, but the resource I found indispensable for us was our ears. So I'll pause for some groans. But what I mean by that is that we had some initial assumptions in mid-March, like people won't want to think about professional development with everything else going on. Turns out that wasn't the case at all. Since March, our enrollment has been up about 40 to 60% for most sessions. So even with those initial assumptions, rather than just canceling everything and retreating to our bunkers, we immediately started reaching out to folks in the university that were closer to our audiences and got their input on what was most important at the time. So even in late March and early April, people were already prioritizing professional development, not avoiding it. So the other thing we did in terms of, our ears being important was reaching out to peers at other large universities to ask about how they were managing their communications, for example. We were able to pick up some really good ideas on how they were managing their websites. And later we were able to share with them some of the quick reference guides and things we developed around managing remote workers and things like that. So anyway, using my ears to listen to what our audiences needed and how our peers were addressing similar challenges really helped us adapt to our learners' needs.
Thanks, Mark. Great answer, actually. Celeste? Can you hear us?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, we can. Yep.
Morning, afternoon, evening, as Mark pointed out. My name is Celeste Bonds, and I am the Manager of Learning and Development at Baylor Scott & White Health. We have locations all across the great state of Texas, including hospitals, clinics, and health plans. I sit in Temple, Texas, but I have team members that are located in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, as well as here in Temple. My team is responsible for operations of the learning management system for the organization, also for consulting, designing, and developing learning solutions for a lot of different content areas, including soft skills, new manager training, leadership development, and a lot of other education, as you can imagine, which is a big deal in healthcare. And also for delivering system orientation every week for all of our newly hired employees. I've been with Baylor Scott & White for almost 8 years. I've learned that the capacity for change and resilience are really critical skills in large healthcare, and especially in an organization that's experiencing growth like we have here at Baylor Scott & White. We have more than 49,000 employees and 7,500 physicians, and we're the largest not-for-profit healthcare system in Texas and one of the largest in the nation. About 1,000 access points, a little over 1,000. That includes about 52 hospitals. So I was asked to open today thinking about one resource that I found indispensable in helping us adapt to our learners' needs during this pandemic. Immediately, I thought of our system orientation contingency plan. The standard work that we outlined in that plan became very critical for us. As I mentioned, my team delivers new hire orientation every Monday, and we generally have somewhere around 1,000 new hires a month. Up until March, we held instructor-led sessions on site at about 4 locations across the state. And then when COVID-19 hit, we were tasked with providing that orientation solution virtually to avoid having large groups of people coming together on their first day. So as you can imagine, there are many moving pieces for a day one live event, from chaplains that open the day in prayer to our executive guest speakers, our caterers, our hiring managers that come by to welcome their new hires on breaks or lunchtime, the secondary orientations that are stopping by to deliver instructions about day two and where new hires should go and what they should expect on their schedule from day two on. So the reason that the contingency plan came to mind for me and became so important to us is that we already had our stakeholders identified. That was really important because there are a lot of them. And we'd already mapped out the flow of all the processes that needed to happen. And we had a checklist of needed actions already created. We were actually thinking when we created the plan that a tornado or some other natural disaster might cause us to cancel orientation, or even that icy roads or something would cause a delay in the start time when we built the plan. It was not created with a pandemic in mind, but it did set us up for success, and it allowed us to really respond to the need very intentionally instead of just sort of reacting in a disorderly fashion. So it really set us up for success.
Thank you, Celeste. That's really a great piece to add, and we'll get into a little bit more detail as we get into this. So, Leanne.
Hello, everybody. It's nice to meet you in some way. I hope you're doing well wherever you're sitting, and great to have you with us. My name is Leanne Nelson. I'm with Cox Communications. We are actually based in Atlanta, but I physically sit in Virginia Beach. So it's hot here, but at least the beach is nearby, so we can get a little bit of relief. Cox is a communications company. We have internet services, video services like HBO. We also have telephone services as well as smart home services. We support both residential and business customers. We're in 17 states. We have 18,000 employees, and our L&D department has about 150 employees. My role is I am the manager of learning administration for Cox, and with that role, my team supports all of the course scheduling, moving around. When you think about flipping from instructor-led to virtual, my team was engaged in all of that for all of the classes that we have all of a sudden, as all of us will be talking about today. Also, we focus on the learning effectiveness component. So all of the evaluation is done with my team. I lay out the strategy for CCI to identify how we will do learning impact studies. And so, of course, we've had a real keen eye on what's been happening with the traditional instructor-led version of a course versus the virtual instructor-led version of a course. So we'll talk about that a little bit later as we go through the panel today. One of the things that has been indispensable in this whole thing, and it's going to sound cheesy as well, has been the relationship that our educators have with our business partners. They have a keen understanding of what the learners need, what those learners' concerns will be. A great majority of the training we do is new hire training, and because of the nature of our business, we have call centers across the country. So there's a lot of hiring, that type of training. Imagine trying to learn everything that your cable television or internet installer knows. You know, they walk into your house, they seem to understand everything about your television and your stereo system and all those things, and they have all sorts of technology that they bring. Well, the people that sell the technology or provide customer care or do the installation, they have to learn a lot. And so a lot of our new hire courses, shortest one is 5 weeks long. Some of them go up to 10 weeks. So when we've had to flip from a traditional classroom to virtual, there was a lot of shifting around of things that had to be done. And it was because our educators really had that relationship with the business. They understood what those concerns are of our new hires coming in. Some new hires have never been in a virtual classroom or meeting setting at all. So how do we get that comfort level established for them right from the beginning when they walk in the door? So that's been a big focus for us. That, and of course, equipment, having cameras and microphones or headsets available. I see, I see Mark's nodding. That was a big lift, and it was such a grab. To get them, they were selling out right from under you sometimes. So The relationship was really the key component, but the equipment was also pretty necessary too.
That's good. Thank you, Leanne. Ralph, last but not least.
Thank you, Nancy. And hello, everyone. Yes, I'm Ralph Romero, Vice President of Talent Management at US Express. For those of you that may not be familiar with US Express, we are one of the nation's largest asset-backed transportation companies in the nation. We are in the top 10 in regards to dedicated contract services. And for most of you, when you hear that, you may think, okay, so the value that US Express delivers to its customers is tractors and trailers, and I will tell you that is a big component of it, but the largest component would be the combined brake power of our staff and our employees. And that's not just coming from me, from the Vice President of Talent Management. I think you hear that from the leadership within our organization. I just get the privilege of leading our talent management team, which focuses on employee development, organizational development, people analytics, our strategic HR business partner team, as well as talent acquisition for the enterprise. In regards to the one resource, so you may think this is cheesy as well, but when I was thinking about this question, the first thing that came to mind was our culture. And I say that because in the past 12 to 18 months, we really have been working hard to pivot our culture to align to what our CEO's expectations are. And with that, if you kind of think of a quadrant, within one of those quadrants is innovation and collaboration. And important within our culture, of course, important within our core values, of course, now that our performance standards or our org competencies tie into that. And I think with that kind of being there, it set the stage for some extreme innovation and collaboration that had to occur during this pandemic to make sure that we could transition in areas that were absolutely essential to keep the business running. And I think whether that be from leadership or from employees, departments working together that maybe haven't in the past as much, I think that kind of set the stage. If you were thinking of technology and I was giving you technology specific, I think it'd be a close tie between Microsoft Teams and Cornerstone, our talent management system.
Thanks, Ralph. That's really, that's insightful. Appreciate that. So we're now that we kind of have a flavor of everybody's story, we're going to dive into the first topic. And what we want to talk about is really around transitioning employees to online learning. So Mark and Ralph, we'll talk to you about this topic. So we know that you both had, or I know that, you both had employees that were familiar and very comfortable in an ILT, in a face-to-face environment. And how did you overcome the challenge of delivering in a virtual environment and making sure that their perception was that it was going to be as effective? So Mark, I'll start with you on that one.
Sure, thanks. So Caroline, again, just for a little bit more context, we have 13,000 full-time employees, which includes staff and faculty, and then about 7,000 temporary employees as well. So for the most part, we're co-located in the same town, which again is pretty odd for some organizations, but here we are in Chapel Hill. For several reasons, including proximity of the audiences and our previously inadequate LMS for employees. We are transitioning Cornerstone. I'll talk more about that later. But most of our courses were done in person. So webinars were catching on somewhat. We had a variety of compliance courses that were online, but for the most part, probably 70 to 75% of our training was classroom. There were and still are challenges with as we converted over to primarily virtually instructor-led classes. So especially if you focus on that word effective that you used. So thankfully I have a great team. We don't have a lot of egos on the team. So we're quick to recognize that we had a lot to learn about moving entirely to virtual instructor-led training. So for example, we only had one instructor on the team that had significant previous experience delivering to remote and hybrid audiences. We all dabbled in it somewhat, but only one person had significant experience. So we leveraged her expertise to bring our other instructors and facilitators up to speed. So this was especially important since we had to move our weekly orientation sessions, just as others have talked about, from this carefully crafted in-person experience that we had designed to maximize networking and engagement to Zoom. Which we'd only used a handful of times for meetings, really. I won't say the first few sessions were ideal. We felt awkward. We know our participants probably felt awkward. We learned some things along the way, like Zoom meetings and Zoom webinars are not the same thing. And the participant and facilitator experience can be very different depending on which of those tools that you use. But thankfully, we're quick learners, and we started doing a better job of leveraging chat panel, polling, breakout rooms, and other things to bring back some of the interaction and networking that initially didn't really translate organically. So we continue to tweak and continuously improve orientations. Our level ones are still strong. They're consistent with our in-person experience, which is great. But as I said, a lot of that was due to the work and some embarrassment along the way. So that was step one, right? Get ourselves competent and comfortable with the technology by building our skills. And we helped each other out too by serving as producers for each other's kind of open enrollment sessions, if you will, and that helped quite a bit. But in addition to taking steps to help ourselves feel more comfortable, we paid a lot of attention in the early sessions to where we saw participants struggling, and we addressed those areas in our communications. So, for example, we modified our pre-class communications to include links to some great LinkedIn learning content and some internal content from our own IT department on using Zoom. For some of those participants that weren't comfortable with Zoom, we found in the early sessions that we had made some assumptions about our audiences. We assumed this was not their first Zoom. We assumed that everyone saw the same view of what was being displayed, that people knew how to find and use the chat panel, for example. So we started giving clear instructions before we dove into the content during every session about how to use chat, how to mute and unmute your microphone, changing the way your name displayed if you wanted to do that, etc. We had one person, for example, that called into orientation. She was using her husband's iPad, so the name on the bottom showed up as Jim's iPad. And so, what do you call this person? Jim's iPad. We'd like to hear from you today. So anyway, we helped them get more comfortable with it. So, and by including that little 2-minute brief introduction in Zoom, we could feel our audiences getting more comfortable. And it also helped avoid issues later in the sessions as well. So questions like, how do I get into chat? And how can I see the whole slide you're presenting? Part of mine is cut off. All those stopped coming in the middle of class. So how do I sum all that up? Well, I guess, we recognized our own opportunities. We got to know the tools really well, and we really worked on our own virtual delivery skills, while also thinking about the aspects of our learning experiences that made folks uncomfortable. We took steps to meet them where they were and then get them comfortable so they could focus on the learning, because I think here we would all agree that if learners are focused on the delivery method instead of the content, it's time for some changes. So.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Mark.
Sure.
Ralph, how did you approach that challenge?
So Nancy, I would say when I thought about this a little bit, and I think we've made a lot of critical decisions during the pandemic that has helped us kind of transition through this and helped in this one question that you're talking about. But I think there were a lot of other decisions that were made a couple of years ago that put us in a position to be ready for this. And I'm not arrogantly at all, because we were making these decisions 2 years ago, unknowingly, right, that this was going to occur. But I think if those decisions weren't made, we would have been in a very different situation. So I think what you're going to hear me echo over and over again is this word transformation, right? I've just talked about it in regards to our culture, 12 to 18 months. Now when I talk about our talent management strategy, I'm going back about 24 months. So about 24 months ago, we were very specific when we were outlining our strategy for the organization from a talent management perspective of what we needed to accomplish to meet certain organizational KPIs that they were, of course, asking us to be able to impact, and those being some of them being financial impacting. And with that, as we were going through that process, we were very intentional to set criteria for what technology was going to have to solve for us, right? What were the things or the barriers that we were having within our organization, but what did technology have? What type of technology or systems were we going to need to solve or meet some of those goals? So I'll give you some quick examples of some of the criteria I'm talking about. So one of them would be real-time data exchange. We knew there were some business rules within our organization that it had to be at a minimum 15 to 30-minute intervals that data was exchanging back and forth with our systems. We also knew that we absolutely had to have the ability to consume, our learners had the ability to consume content offline. 80% of our staff, right, they're mobile throughout the United States at any given time. What we did not want to do was put the burden on the employee to have to use cell service to consume the content that was being sent to them, but instead be able to hit a Wi-Fi spot, download the content offline, then no matter where they are, they can complete the content. Once they hit another Wi-Fi spot, right, the content goes back to the system to give them their completions. Another item that we knew the criteria was the ability to have pre-hires to be able to consume the training, right? So there was some processing that had to happen on front with some of the positions within our organization before they can get hired, and we still wanted that training to still occur to be able to use the time of that potential employee as best as possible. Functionality for our competencies, we knew that was going to be big. I know there's research out there that's say competency models are important. There's other research out there that says competency models are dead. I will say we're kind of a blend in between to make sure that it's fitting our organization appropriately, but we knew that the tool had to tie to the competencies that we wanted and we were developing at the time 2 years ago because we were very immature. And that would include observation checklists, individual development plans, things of that nature. And the other thing that we knew, because there was a piece of technology that we didn't have and we have invested in it pretty heavily, is in simulation. And we knew that that was one piece of technology, but we knew the other piece of technology had to connect to that, right? Our learning management system. There had to be some connectivity between our simulators that are essentially dispersed through 8 different locations throughout the United States to make sure that we can manage that appropriately and most importantly, be able to extract data from it. So an example of all of that, right? All those decisions were made. The platform that, again, that I've already alluded to is Cornerstone, right? What we are calling our talent management system. And they were able to meet those criteria for us. Thankfully, right, Bluewater was our partner in that as we were trying to do some of that implementation to make sure that we can meet all those deliverables, and thankfully we have been. An example though of one course that, right, is being consumed through Cornerstone now, that we were challenged to pivot is historically we have an instructor-led class, and it has been that way for probably 30 plus years, right? And we had to pivot and we had to make it e-learning, and it was actually for our professional drivers. It's their onboard computer. So it's a piece of software that they interact with on a daily basis, whether that's determining where their next destination is, whether they're scheduling what we would call home time or time off, essentially anything day to day that driver's going to be interacting with that. We challenged, right, our instructional designers to go to the drawing board. We leveraged Storyline in terms of the software to find a way to get the best learner experience and still, right, for all of us, right, it's about learning and transfer. Can we continue to transfer the same knowledge and skills through that platform that now is no longer going to be instructor-led training, at least in the interim? I would say without question, our designers rose to the occasion. I think it's another example of innovation and collaboration because we had to partner with our safety department as we were working through this, as well as some of our other professional drivers to make sure that, right, as we're making this transition, are we still getting the same outcomes that we were expected? So overall, given the environment, I think e-learning right now is meeting the need.
Okay, that's great, Ralph. Thank you for expanding on that quite a bit. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit here, and before we do that, I want to remind everybody about the Q&A tool. And so just put in any questions, and we have our team here that's going to be monitoring that. So we hope to get to those questions as well. So for Celeste and Leanne, let's talk a little bit about planning for change. And you both alluded to this a little bit in your opening stories about your key resource that was indispensable for you. So when you think about the organization, the overall planning, your stakeholders buy-in, you know, how did all of that fit in to help you respond to how fast you had to mobilize? So Leanne, I'll start with you on that.
Oh, okay. So when we looked at what was happening, well, first of all, we were already, and probably others could relate, we were already delivering some of our courses in a virtual environment. So that was already happening, and but not nearly, of course, as much as we're doing now. But we had some lessons learned from even some of those, you know, smaller implementations using a virtual platform, which is typically WebEx, or it could be Skype for Business. now Microsoft Teams. So we use one or any of them. So the change part though was, how do we support this enormous volume of virtual education, especially when in the past it was for a 2 or 3 or 4 hour session of some sort. Now we are having to flip courses that were 5 weeks long and somehow make them work, or 6 weeks long, in the virtual environment. So one of the first things we realized is that when we have something like that going on, or any of our highly technical courses that we have to offer, we needed to really commit to resources to this process to make sure that the learner experience was still effective, and that they were learning what they needed to learn so they could go out and do their job. So instantly we took a look at how could we make this work. And what we decided to do was introduce and formalize the role of a producer. Now, the way we did this is we use Training Orchestra to manage all of our educator assignments and our room assignments as well. So we partnered with Training Orchestra to create the producer role as a non-training activity. So it wasn't currently in the platform, and we asked them to work with us on that, and they did. And what that allowed us to do is, for every course that we built out where we thought a producer would be necessary, we could book one of our educator resources as a producer. And what that did for us, as we were shifting all these classes and making these changes from an operational perspective, is we had visibility into the capacity of our educator team. And we could see how many folks were in the producer role versus in the classroom. But the producer role is not limited to the courses that our department delivers. When the business, and probably everybody in the call could relate, sometimes the business, they get into training their own, right? And they get into trying to run these, these informational sessions themselves. But they find themselves in a world of, instead of being in that conference room to share that knowledge, now they're using a virtual meeting room or virtual delivery system. So our educators will also partner with the business as a producer to make sure those events are effective for those learners in those situations. So the change for us was really, how do we manage the educator team and make sure that we build in that great learner experience as we're quickly transitioning the content to make it work in that environment, building those interactions. So that was a big shift for us, and it's been highly effective.
That's great to hear, especially how you adapted so quickly with adding in that role. Now, Celeste, you had lightning speed adaptation that you had to apply, being a first responder, a hospital system, and all kinds of challenges. So how did you approach the planning part for that big change?
Well, first off, it's important to note that the contingency plan that I talked about earlier was developed a couple of years ago, actually, and it needed approvals and buy-in from a really large group of stakeholders. Thanks to my orientation team, and after many, many rounds of feedback and edits, we were finally able to get it approved and formalized just last fall, long before COVID-19 was a thing, but also long after we first knew that we needed to get this in place. And so, we were very thankful that we finally pushed it over the finish line there. We had people changing roles and things like that caused us to have to step back and repeat some of the approval steps and things like that. Every Monday, when we welcome our new hires, we're really thankful that we get to be part of that, and that first impression of Baylor Scott & White, it's important, and to be entrusted with this day, it's humbling. And it's critical that we make that great first impression as we welcome people to an organization that for many is we call it a sacred vocation. It's a day of first for many, venturing into large healthcare for the first time. Sometimes it's a first job, and often the culmination of years of education preparing for a new career. And being ready to welcome these folks is our mission. So for us, when we got the news on Thursday at noon that we were going to need to move orientation on that following Monday to a virtual event. We'd already received the orientation list, and we knew that we had almost 200 new hires that had already received their instructions to attend in person at one of our locations across Texas. We immediately dusted off our contingency plan, which we hadn't looked at for some months, and looked to see what pieces of that we could use to sort of set the change in motion. And we were pleasantly surprised that there were a lot of solid foundational pieces there that we were going to be able to use. So on that next Monday, we knew that many of the new hires would be attending a WebEx meeting for the very first time, and others would be tech savvy. And so we needed to be prepared to support and engage people across that entire spectrum, from those having completed their education in an online school classroom, maybe, to those that are trying to join and participate on their smartphone because they don't own a computer and maybe on a borrowed Wi-Fi in their car in front of a coffee shop. We knew that the most critical piece was going to be the support, and we really credit our colleagues and our partnerships with the onboarding department for partnering with us to help provide those clear communications and some extra technology support just to get everybody into the virtual classroom so we could deliver the content. We also credit our IT partners at Baylor Scott & White, as they were really quick to help us move to a new WebEx event platform. We were using WebEx meetings, but then we found out we also owned WebEx events and WebEx training both. They're a little bit more interactive and have more bells and whistles. And then the technology consultants on our own team really helped us tremendously as we moved our content to a virtual format. We created a lot of job aids. I think it was Mark that talked earlier about how important it became to provide those upfront instructions on how to use the chat. You know, we made that same false assumption that everybody was going to have the same view, and they did not. And so we had to continually, in an agile way, adjust our job aids to make sure that we were, you know, providing solid material that would help them. And we distributed those with the communications to help people join the WebEx. And out of that almost 200 new hires that first week, all but 2 that should have been there were able to join that virtual session and attend. And so we were pretty proud of that village that it took to make that happen.
That's incredible.
We tell people in orientation, we tell them that they need to wear 2 hats when they come, and one of them is to do their job, and the second is to always be thinking of ways to do their job better, that culture of continuous improvement. So that first week was, there was a lot behind the scenes that could have happened to make it a little more smooth, and so we began to look at the session every single week as we huddled afterward and really think about what can we do to make it better? What are the things that we can add back in? Adding video back in was a big deal for us because a lot of our content is video. We think it's a really engaging way that we can sort of immerse those new hires in our culture, teaching them about our core commitment to our job, our core values, ambitions, strategies. We introduce them to their colleagues across the system through videos and teach them about our people and our community involvement. So week 1, we delivered that content almost entirely through the facilitator. And then we, with our technology and our partners on our team and also in IT, we learned tricks about how to play video over WebEx in a way that wasn't choppy and didn't create the audio in the video.
Absolutely.
And we began to add back in the blended learning interactivity that we utilized, those kinds of things that made it a richer experience for our new hires.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Celeste. And it's a lot of good lessons learned. I think a lot of us have already gone through all of that too and are continuing to do that. So to talk about results and successes, which is where you kind of led us, Celeste, so thank you for that, with the effectiveness of learning. So Ralph and Leanne, let's talk just a little bit about the impact of the changes that you made, and whether or not you thought what you did now with the virtual transformation is more effective than pre-pandemic. You know, which bits and pieces there. So Ralph, we'll start with you.
Sure, Nancy, thank you. And I'm going to provide a little bit of context probably on the front end, and then I can start transitioning a little bit into how we transitioned into the virtual aspect. But anytime from a talent management perspective within my group, we do our very best to start with a couple of things off the bat, and this is very high level, but more competencies or more organizational KPIs and desired outcomes. What are the potential variables? We'll ask the question, what are the variables that are impacting these KPIs outside of maybe just necessarily knowledge and skill gaps, which is important for us as we're trying to measure what success looks like, as well as let's make sure that our output is as learner-centered as possible, meaning it's not coming from the perspective of a subject matter expert, as well as measurable, right, performance-based. So those are a couple of things that we start with, and I'm going to jump into orientation, where I think a lot of us have been talking about, right? Because I think that's where we bring in a lot of our new employees, and I think that's where we make a big impact. But for orientation for us, we facilitate that over 8 different locations throughout the United States, and we do that twice a week at every location. For us, orientation is tying in the culture of who US Express is, but it's also very skill-based. And also there are some knowledge components that we sprinkle in there specifically for our professional drivers and other positions within our organization. Again, you're going to hear this time frame again, right? So about 2 years ago, 24 months, right? This was one of the big initiatives that we took on, and that was part of our talent management strategy, was transforming this process. The outcome of that, right, over the last 2 years, what we've been able to see in terms of the KPIs that we're measuring, or what the organization is holding us accountable to, is one of those KPIs, we've seen a 20% improvement. A couple of the other KPIs that we're being measured on, we've seen a 7 to 10% improvement. So we were on pace, right? We're doing some good things. We're very excited about them. And then like all of us, right, here came the pandemic, right? Here comes COVID. Here comes the federal and state mandates that start telling us class sizes have to be capped. And right, we absolutely adhere to them, and we want to make sure all of our employees are safe. But at the same time, our business is connected to several customers that are essential, right? As our business is essential. So it's not that demand just vanished because it didn't. So then the case comes up of, okay, so COVID has created a capacity crunch for orientation, but the demand is still there. And I kind of give you an example of demand from a transportation perspective. Me and my wife, this was a couple of days ago, we ordered from Publix, and it was curbside. So we order online, probably about 30 products, right? And we go curbside to pick up at Publix, and we only get about 25 of them. So from our perspective, right, there's still disruption within the supply chain from a consumer perspective. So we're still not getting the product. So the demand absolutely is still there, and we're seeing it within our industry. So all of that being said, is we had to pivot from 100% being on-site orientation to providing some sort of virtual orientation while still balancing those other KPIs. Those KPIs just don't disappear. They're still important to our organization, as I mentioned earlier. But we made sure we had to partner with a couple of more departments within our organization to make sure that we still had the right metrics in place. There were a couple that were added that were important to a couple of different departments, from an on-site to virtual. They wanted to make sure a couple of numbers didn't degrade over time to make sure that they could still hit their objectives. So we made sure that we added that into our plan. The result was taking our blended approach to learning a little bit further than what we have it right now, where we're allowing certain content and some pre-hire items to be done off-site or virtually, right? And again, that connects back to what I was talking about earlier about Cornerstone. Again, that was one of those things that we had to make sure that pre-hires could get it in the system to consume it. And it just happened to work out perfectly in this environment that happened to already be set up. But we had to maintain, there was no question we had to maintain a blended approach, because what I mentioned earlier, it is still heavy skill based. So there are still certain things that have to be reinforced with practical application, right? E-learning isn't going to cut it for everything. Certain things did, certain things did not. And again, I think our KPIs helped us to kind of say level set with that. And I give an example as I was thinking about this, but Like I imagine going to a doctor and I find out my doctor, the only training that they've received is formally or continuing education wide is all e-learning. I'd be the first to tell you, I'm not going to be going there to have surgery or my kids to have surgery if that's all the formal training they had and there was no practical application. So it's really no different with our professional drivers. There are certain skills that can be consumed through e-learning virtually, but we still had, like I mentioned earlier, simulators that we invested in heavily and about 3 or 4 other things that practical application had to occur. Now, of course, we had to set up those platforms a lot differently. Schedules had to change. We had to alter some of our SOPs a little bit in terms of thresholds and timings. So of course we had to work through all of those things and we did. So the result of all of that, right, as we go through all of it, we did see the skills from virtual as we were kind of tracking the numbers. No degradation in the KPIs that we had before. There were some slight improvements to the KPIs that we included that the other departments were asking for. It wasn't statistically significant. The sample size isn't big enough for us to go out, but we were just excited. The business was excited that we didn't see anything negative come out of it. But I would say to me and you as a consumer, I think the win is we're still able to hire our drivers. We're still able to develop them in a way that is still keeping the road safe. And hopefully, right, the next time I go to Publix or the next time that you go to Publix and I order 30 items, I'm able to get all 30 items. But there's no question the pandemic has put a disruption within the supply chain.
Yeah, thank you, Ralph. Yeah, I know we're all still thinking about toilet paper, so appreciate that. So Leanne, how do you approach this particular focus on effectiveness and measurement and your success, what you considered your success?
Well, we had a couple, like a multi-pronged approach to this. So we already had a course evaluation strategy in place, before COVID came along. But how did that impact, what we were doing? So we really broadened the way we looked at the numbers to include virtual learning, of course. Before, virtual was just thrown in with everything else. But once we started shifting almost everything, because we do have people that drive trucks, the cable guys and people that do all that, they're doing that stuff. So they still have hands-on training, but for the most part, the vast majority of our courses are now virtual. But we had to take a look at how is that working for us now. So the first thing we did was we lifted out the standard and the standard classroom version of a course and compared it to the virtual version of that same course, just to see how the performance was going. So we looked at the level 1 measures of just NPS, just to get a handle on the student reaction, the learner's reaction. And for the most part, what we found is some of the courses were above, the benchmark or above the instructor-led version. Some were at the same level. Some of the virtual versions were not better than the instructor-led. I mean, not everything was, shining easily. There's still work to be done, frankly, on some of it to improve that learner experience. I think what we're seeing in the data now when we look at some of the follow-up, the level 3 evaluations that we're doing, is at first, especially with our new hire classes, at first when they came on board, I think, frankly, in the terms of COVID, people were thrilled to still be hired. And people were gobbling up, really, I can see people were gobbling up the content. They were loving the virtual environments, but you get into, it keeps going that way and they're on board and they're performing in their role. So some of the follow-up evaluations that we've done from our virtual learners, we've seen some things where they're doing very well with some of the tools and methodologies that they had to learn. And there's still some areas for opportunity for us to improve. And so we're taking a look at the virtual learning platforms that we're using, how we can also modify some of the course content. We're taking a look at learner fatigue now in that virtual environment to see what we can do with that data to continue to improve the learner's experience. But overall, when we looked at just the course by course comparison of the virtual version and the instructor-led, the overall NPS was virtually identical. I mean, we were talking, like Ralph said, just fractions of a percentage difference overall. But when we peel back the onion a little bit, there's definitely some courses that have an opportunity, to be improved upon. And that's just all part of continuous improvement anyway. So we continue to keep an eye on that, and we're just now getting that follow-up data back, because we usually give the learners about 30 days on the job before we reach out to do those follow-up evaluations. So it's trickling in, but we're starting to see some great information. I hope that helps.
It does. That's very encouraging. Really appreciate that. Well, Jennifer, I'm gonna throw it back to you to see if there are some questions or anything further that we can reach out to the audience and answer.
Yeah, yep. So we do have just a few minutes to take audience questions, and we have had a few. So I'm going to start with, grab my notes. I'm going to start with something that might be quick to answer potentially during this time. But we had a lot of people wondering in terms of platforms for VIT and such. So what platforms are used to facilitate effective virtual training, or VILT, and how do you effectively have small group breakout sessions within those virtual environments? So I'm going to just open that up to any of the panelists. If anyone wants to grab that question, or questions, I should say.
I'll start, and then others jump in, of course. So I mean, I think we are, as I mentioned earlier, we're using Zoom, and I think leveraging the breakout rooms pretty effectively. I saw some chat going on the side. Again, you can set those up ahead of time if you've got, maybe you already know who's coming and everything else. You can do that ahead of time if you want to break people out based on whatever criteria you choose. But you can also do it kind of more in the moment, if it's something that comes up as part of class. But I would say that, for the most part, it works well. Just be mindful of how many people you're putting in a breakout room. If you're sticking 10 people in there, it's probably not going to be that effective. You may as well just have the whole group. But you also don't want to, necessarily separate 20 people into 10 breakout rooms either. I mean, again, if you're looking at kind of having those dialogues or those triads or those kinds of things, I mean, certainly you can do that. And I know at least with Zoom, it allows you a pretty good number of folks to be able to go in each breakout room. But that's been effective for us. We've been able to transition a lot of the in-person conversation kind of activities, share with each other, that type of thing, and then come back and share with the broader group. That works well, especially when combined with using chat as well. So anyway, I'll start with that.
Great, thank you so much, Mark. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add?
I can piggyback on that with Mark and Leanne, if you go ahead.
No, it's all good.
So for our platform, so from instructor-led training to virtual, the majority of ours, we've transitioned over to some sort of e-learning, right? So we've leveraged Storyline, but if we're doing anything that's virtual instructor-led training, we're using Microsoft Teams now. We used to leverage Zoom. Our enterprise decided to go Teams. It seems to be working out very well. I know we had to do a lot of training on the front end just to make sure that our staff was comfortable doing it, because our office staff, or our back office staff, probably 97% of them were all working within their office. So this transition of working virtually to what we're at right now, right, that was a big transition. Teams wasn't leveraged a lot because of that reason, but I think Teams did a fantastic job. And in regards to developing our e-learning against Storyline, and in terms of even something else a little interesting within Cornerstone that we've implemented from like a social aspect, they have a component in there called Cornerstone Connect. So if you kind of connect all three of those things together, you can kind of get a social aspect that the learning kind of continues on.
Okay, great, thank you, Ralph. I'm gonna just move on to the next one because we literally have like 3 more minutes. So let's see if we can get one more in. So one of our challenges is to take classroom instructors and teach them to train others virtually, which is a very different skill set. Most have very little instructional experience to begin with and may be in the position for only 2 to 3 years. So does anyone have a similar experience with this challenge, or can you offer potential solutions for rapidly training instructors to deliver effective virtual training? Celeste, do you want to chime in on that one?
Sure, I'd be happy to. We have landed on a model where we have one facilitator that delivers all the content for our orientation, and then we have multiple support people supporting the session instead of different facilitators doing different sessions, and then the onboarding team trying to manage all these different invites and making sure the right people show up at the right session so they get the information they need to park in Dallas, as opposed to Austin, Round Rock area. And so we've landed on one facilitator to do that, and she's very skilled in a virtual environment, has a lot of experience. But some of our others were not initially, and so as we began to work through those things, we found that the support person was critical. Leanne talked about a producer role, and for us it was the support role that was critical. Those people can manage the chat and a lot of the interactivity and the support questions that arise. So for us, we just shored up the team that was delivering the content.
Okay, great. Thank you, Celeste. I do want to throw one more out there for everyone. It's a little bit more focused on results. And so how do you know that the training we delivered, or how do you know the training you delivered had the impact you wanted, especially, you know, in this new world where so much training was quickly transitioned to virtual?
I'll just quickly respond to that and then let somebody else
Sure.
hop in. But one of our biggest aha moments was that our satisfaction scores remain the same. And that really surprised us because we've done a lot of benchmarking when we developed our orientation a couple of years ago and determined that in-person ILT, that face-to-face contact was going to be really important in engagement of new hires. But we found that technology has evolved so much that people are able to engage and be interactive virtually just as well as in person. And in fact, people are more uninhibited, if you will, in a virtual environment sometimes than in person. So our satisfaction scores were a good measure for us.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Celeste. Leanne, I saw you come off mute. Do you want to add to that?
Well, I mean, the only other thing just to say is that follow-up. So, and I agree with what Celeste said. I think the technology has gotten much better. People do feel a little bit more open in some situations. But for us, you know, we did have great NPS with both versions, with the virtual version of courses, but the follow-up data is really where the rubber meets the road to really see how it's transferring from that virtual experience back to the classroom. So we're keeping an eye on that. Some of it's been great news. Some of it's like, yeah, we got some things we need to fix. But I would encourage folks that are using the platform either way to do that touch back with, you know, with your learners to see how it's going once they're on the job.
Okay, great. Thanks, Leanne. All right, so, you know, I know there's probably so much more that we could say here today, but we're going to go ahead and conclude the roundtable in just a second. Nancy, did you have anything else you wanted to add before we wrap it up?
No, I just wanted to say thank you so much to our panelists for dedicating all their time, but most importantly for all of the programs that you continue to create and the passion you have for what you're doing for your organizations. Honestly, that's the inspiration that we all have in moving forward in our industry. So I really, with heartfelt thanks, appreciate all your time and stories.
Great, thank you so much, Nancy. Yes, and thank you so much to our speakers. It's really been a pleasure to hear your stories and learn from your experiences. So thank you so much for sharing. And to our audience, we're very happy you could make it. If you'd like any more information on what you've heard today, please reach out to us. We're happy to help. We'll be sending you all a replay within the next day or two. We'll try to get some more of these questions and answers, or questions answered, and we'll get them posted along with the replay as well. So we wish you all a great day, and thanks so much.